In the small town of Hamilton, Massachusetts, there is a church. It may pass by inconspicuously when driving down the street, but there is more to it than meets the eye. The First Congregational Church of Hamilton is 300 years old and is still in use. It existed roughly 60 years before America was born, and yet its legacy is still very much alive today. The church was born in the years of 1713 and 1714. In those days, Hamilton was simply the hamlet, a small farm town south of the town of Ipswich, which at that time encompassed the modern-day towns of Rowley, Boxford, and Ipswich. The citizens of the hamlet attended church at the First Parish of Ipswich, a church established in Ipswich in 1634.
Geographically, it doesn't look like Ipswich is that far from Hamilton, or what was at that time called the hamlet. But if you're traveling by sleigh or by horse or oxen, it actually is a ways. It's about 5 miles away.
Attendees from the hamlet not only had to travel a long way to go to church, but they had to cross the Miles River along the way, which was troublesome in springtime with its soggy banks. So, in the year 1712, a group petitioned Ipswich to split off and form their own parish, originally named the Third Parish of Ipswich.
Everything revolved around the church, separating actually out from the first parish of Ipswich was significant because all the taxes were paid to the meeting house. So the Ipswich church lost their tax base of those people that shifted over to here. And that's one reason why initially the first parish people in Ipswich didn't want the congregation here to start because they'd lost the money.
They built a new meeting house to hold church in at the corner of Bay Road and Cutler Road, and appointed their first pastor, a man named Samuel Wigglesworth. Wigglesworth was a medical doctor who not only became the pastor, but also the physician of the hamlet. Between 1760 and 1762, when the church was in disrepair, a new church was built in the same place, and it is this building which still serves as the sanctuary for today's First Congregational Church of Hamilton. Samuel Wigglesworth remained pastor for 54 years until his death in 1768. In 1771, the church appointed a new pastor, a man named Manasseh Cutler.
The first minister was a guy named Samuel Wigglesworth, who was here for 54 years. The second minister was Manasseh Cutler, who was there for 52 years. He knew everyone, all the great patriots, from George Washington to Sam Adams to John Adams. He was the aide-de-camp of Lafayette. He knew everyone, and he was also a congressman, and he was the central person to get the 1787 Northwest Ordinance through Congress.
Cutler was a man of many callings. He graduated from Yale in 1765 and studied ministry under his father-in-law. Pastor for 52 years, he was devoted to the church for the rest of his life. And yet, among his other life achievements, he was also a teacher, clergyman, attorney, a member of the House of Representatives, and a patriot chaplain during the Revolutionary War. In 1786, he and a group of 4 other men formed the Ohio Company of Associates, a group planning to colonize the Ohio Valley. Cutler went to New York to negotiate with Congress for a grant to form a colony there. He was able to acquire a contract for 1.5 million acres of land in Ohio to settle.
The very, very first covered wagons going west, literally starting in Ohio, but then onwards, the first covered wagons going west actually left from that spot right over there, about 30 feet from where we are sitting right now.
It was the First Congregational Church that was the site of the settlers' departure. 45 men and their families left from the doors of the church for Ohio, where they formed the town of Marietta in 1788. Cutler did not go, but visited the town in July. He returned home in 1789 and continued to preach until his death in 1723. The First Congregational Church of Hamilton thrived for many years. It survived 2 earthquakes in 1727 and 1744, and it saw many decades after that. But in the coming late 1800s and early 1900s, the church would face many internal challenges.
Up to the mid-1800s, society revolved around religious parishes. That meant so that the center of society was, again, not the church. They never called it a church. They called it a meeting house. And about mid-1800s, that whole religious center of society began to break down. So the church-state split began to break down. As a result, this church became less and less the center of society. So it became, after Manasseh Cutler in 1823, 1824 when he died, it really kind of fell back to just being a very simple village church that lost its prominence.
The church had a lack of solid leadership, and pastors came and went every couple years, each one a struggle to pay due to the church's trickling income, and most Sundays there were fewer than 50 attendants. After a while, the church began to have financial problems, and historical items from the church were even sold to make ends meet. The church was struggling to stay on top of its expenses, and eventually, in the 1960s, the leaders of the church had to consider the possibility of closing it down. But when they all met at a restaurant to make the final decision, they all agreed that they could not decide to close down the church. To do so would be to single-handedly bring an end to a very long history of worship. And so they chose to keep the church open, and in the next several years the church experienced enough growth to stay standing, and even focus on new buildings and hiring a stable pastor. The First Congregational Church of Hamilton has thus withstood the test of time for 3 centuries.
The whole community has been very impacted by this church that, again, was the center of society, and then by the mid-20th century had almost died, and now I think he's had a very vibrant presence in this, not only this community, Hamilton and Wenham, but Topsfield and Ipswich, and people come from all around this area to go to this church.
It is still the center of Christianity in Hamilton today, supplemented by Gordon College and Gordon Conwell Seminary. And it stands for not just a religion, but a community of loving people. The story of the FCCH does not end, it only goes on. Perhaps it has even just begun.